There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied, like something is holding its breath just out of sight. Most people think fear comes from what you can see. They're wrong. The worst kind of fear comes from what you almost hear, what you almost understand. This story isn't about ghosts. It's about something far worse. Something that lives where no one thinks to look. And once you hear it, it will hear you too. I didn't notice it at first. That's the part that bothers me the most now. It wasn't some loud crash or a dramatic moment that made everything change. It was subtle. So subtle I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. Just a faint sound, like something shifting beneath the floorboards late at night. At first I thought it was the house settling. Old houses do that. That's what everyone says. And I believed it, because believing anything else would have meant admitting something was wrong. Something deeply wrong. The basement had always been there, but I never really used it. It was one of those unfinished spaces. Concrete walls, low ceiling, a single weak bulb hanging from a frayed wire. The kind of place you avoid without knowing why. When I first moved in, I told myself I'd clean it up eventually. Turn it into storage or maybe a workspace. But weeks passed, then months, and I never went down there. Not because I was scared, just because I didn't feel the need to. The first time I heard the sound clearly, it was around 2:17 a.m. I remember checking the time because it woke me up so suddenly. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. A slow dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across concrete. I lay in bed, completely still, listening. My heart was pounding harder than it should have been for something so small. It stopped after a few seconds. Just stopped. Like it knew I was listening. I got out of bed, trying to act normal, even though my hands were already shaking. I told myself it was probably a pipe or maybe a rat. Houses like this always have something. I walked to the basement door at the end of the hallway. The wood felt colder than it should have. I stood there for a moment, staring at the handle, waiting to hear something again. But there was nothing. Just silence. Too much silence. I didn't open the door that night. I went back to bed, convincing myself I was overreacting. But sleep didn't come easy after that. Every creak of the house felt louder. Every shadow seemed darker. And somewhere in the back of my mind, there was a quiet, persistent thought. Something had been moving down there, not pipes, not rats, something else. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Sunlight has a way of making fear feel stupid. I even laughed at myself while making coffee. It was just an old house. Nothing more. Still, I found myself glancing at the basement door more often than usual. It looked ordinary, too ordinary, like it was pretending. By the third night, the sound came back. This time it was different, closer, sharper, not just dragging, but tapping. Slow, deliberate taps against something hard. I sat upright in bed, every muscle tense. The pattern wasn't random. It almost felt intentional, like someone or something was trying to send a message. Tap, tap, pause, tap. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, listening. The tapping stopped, but something worse replaced it. Breathing. Faint, uneven breathing coming from below. It was so quiet I almost doubted it was real. But once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't the sound of air moving through pipes, it was wet, human, alive. That's when I finally decided I needed to check. Not because I wanted to, but because not knowing was becoming unbearable. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen, even though I knew there was a bulb downstairs. I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything about that place anymore. The basement door creaked as I opened it, the sound echoing louder than it should have. I stood at the top of the stairs, shining the flashlight down into the darkness. The light barely reached the bottom. It felt like the darkness was swallowing it. For a moment I considered turning back, pretending none of this was happening. But the thought of going back to bed, knowing something might still be down there, was worse. I took the first step down slowly. The wood groaned under my weight. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder as I descended, thick and damp, carrying a faint smell I couldn't quite place. Not rot, not exactly. something older, something stale. When I reached the bottom, I hesitated before stepping onto the concrete floor. The flashlight beam shook slightly as I moved it across the room. Everything looked the same as I remembered. Bare walls, scattered boxes, nothing unusual, nothing that explained the sounds. For a moment I felt relief. Maybe I had imagined it. Then I noticed the marks. They were faint at first, barely visible in the dim light. Long, uneven scratches across the floor. Not random, parallel, like something had been dragged repeatedly in the same direction, toward the far wall. My stomach tightened as I followed the trail with the flashlight. The wall itself looked normal, until I got closer. The concrete wasn't smooth there. It had been disturbed somehow, cracked almost. And in the center of it there was a narrow opening, too small to notice from a distance, too deliberate to be natural. I crouched down, my breath shallow, and aimed the flashlight into the gap. The beam revealed nothing at first, just darkness, deep, suffocating darkness. But as I leaned closer, I heard it again. That breathing. This time it was louder. And it wasn't coming from behind me, it was coming from inside the wall. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The breathing shifted, becoming uneven, almost curious, like it had noticed me, like it was aware of my presence. Then something moved inside the darkness, not fast, not sudden, slow, deliberate. A shape pressed against the inside of the opening, not fully visible, but enough to see that it wasn't human. The surface of it looked wrong, too smooth in some places, too jagged in others. And then, it pressed closer. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The beam spun wildly across the floor, throwing distorted shadows across the walls. For a split second, the light hit the opening again. And I saw it clearly. An eye, not like any eye I'd ever seen. Too large, too dark, reflecting the light in a way that made it look almost liquid. It didn't blink, it just stared. At me. I don't remember how long I stood there staring at that eye. Time didn't move the way it was supposed to anymore. Every second stretched, warped, thick like syrup. My body refused to respond. I couldn't run, I couldn't scream. All I could do was stare back as that thing, whatever it was, watched me from inside the wall. Its gaze didn't feel curious anymore. It felt aware, calculating, like it was learning something about me just by looking. Then the eye moved. Not a blink, not a twitch. It shifted sideways, slowly sliding out of view into the darkness. The breathing stopped instantly, replaced by a silence so complete it made my ears ring. That silence felt deliberate, like a pause, like the moment before something happens. My muscles finally reacted and I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance as my heel caught against the uneven concrete floor. I grabbed the flashlight with shaking hands, pointing it back toward the opening. The beam trembled violently, but I forced myself to keep it steady. The hole was empty now, just darkness again. No movement, no sound. Nothing to prove what I had just seen was real. But the scratches on the floor were still there, the disturbed concrete, the smell. I wasn't imagining this. I should have left then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of the basement, to get out of the house, to never come back. But something held me there. Not curiosity, not bravery. Something worse. A need to understand. Because if I walked away without answers, I knew I would never feel safe again, not anywhere. I stepped closer to the wall. Each movement felt wrong, like I was doing something I wasn't supposed to. The air near the opening felt colder than the rest of the basement. Not just cold, unnatural, like it didn't belong in the same space. I knelt down again, slower this time, trying to control my breathing. The flashlight beam slid across the edges of the gap, revealing jagged lines where the concrete had been forced apart. It hadn't cracked. It had been opened. The realization hit me harder than anything I'd seen so far. This wasn't damage, it wasn't decay. Something had created this space intentionally. From the inside, my throat went dry. I leaned closer despite myself. angling the flashlight deeper into the gap. The light still didn't reach far. It just disappeared after a certain point, like it was being swallowed. I felt a pressure building in my chest, a heavy, suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. Then I heard it again. Not breathing this time. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it. A soft, broken sound like air forced through something that didn't understand how to speak. I froze, straining to listen. The whisper came again, slightly clearer. It wasn't a word. It was trying to become one. My name, or something close to it. I jerked back violently, my head hitting the wall behind me. Pain flared, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing too fast, trying to process what I had just heard. That thing didn't just know I was there. It knew me. Or at least, it was learning me. The whisper grew slightly louder, still distorted, still wrong, but unmistakably forming sounds that resembled human speech. My pulse hammered in my ears as I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the opening. No, I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. No, no, no. The whisper stopped. For a brief, fragile moment, everything was still again. Then something slammed against the inside of the wall. The impact was sudden and violent, sending a deep, hollow thud through the concrete. I flinched hard, nearly dropping the flashlight again. Dust shook loose from the ceiling, drifting down in thin clouds. Another slam followed, harder this time. The wall didn't crack further, but it flexed. That's what terrified me most. Concrete isn't supposed to move like that. I turned and ran. The stairs felt steeper than before, each step a struggle as panic took over. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if something was coming out of that opening. I didn't want to know if it could. My lungs burned as I reached the top, slamming the basement door shut behind me with all my strength. The sound echoed through the house, too loud, too final. I stood there gripping the handle, my entire body shaking. I waited, listening for any sign that something was following me. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no scratching, no whispering. Just silence again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt patient. I locked the door. It didn't make me feel any safer. That night I didn't go back to bed. I stayed in the living room with all the lights on, sitting on the couch with the flashlight still clutched in my hand. Every small noise made me flinch. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock. Even my own breathing sounded too loud. At some point I must have dozed off, because I woke up to something touching my foot. I snapped awake instantly, jerking back on the couch. My heart nearly stopped as I looked down. For a split second I was sure something had grabbed me, but there was nothing there. Just the edge of the blanket slipping off onto the floor. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping sound. Not from the basement. From inside the walls. My head turned slowly toward the nearest wall. The tapping came again, closer this time. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It was the same pattern, but it wasn't below me anymore. It was beside me. My stomach dropped. No, I whispered, barely able to form the word. The tapping shifted again, moving, traveling along the inside of the wall, tracing a path through the house. I could hear it getting closer, moving from one section to another, like something crawling through the hollow spaces behind the drywall. And then it stopped. Right next to me. The wall beside the couch creaked softly. A faint, almost invisible line appeared in the paint, a hairline crack stretching slowly outward as pressure built from the other side. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly. My entire body had locked up again. The crack widened, just slightly, just enough for something on the other side to push against it. A shape formed beneath the surface of the wall, not fully breaking through, just pressing from within. The outline was wrong. Too long, too thin in some places, too thick in others. It shifted, adjusting itself, as if trying to find the right way to come through. And then I heard it again. Closer than ever before, my name, clearer this time. Almost correct. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was frozen on the couch, staring at that shifting shape inside the wall, and the next I was already on my feet, stumbling backward like my body had made the choice for me. My name, almost perfect this time, still echoed in my head, overlapping with the faint creaking of drywall under pressure. It wasn't guessing anymore. It wasn't learning. It knew. The shape pressed harder, stretching the surface outward. The paint fractured further, tiny flakes falling to the floor like dry skin. I could see more detail now. Something like joints, something like fingers, but too long, too uneven, bending in ways that didn't make sense. The wall didn't break open. It accepted it, like it was softening from the inside, reshaping itself to let whatever that thing was pass through. A wet sound followed. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, sickening shift, like something sliding through a space that wasn't meant for it. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked tight as I watched the outline distort further, pressing halfway through before retreating slightly, adjusting, learning the structure of the barrier. It was figuring out how to come through. "Stop," I whispered, my voice barely existing. The wall answered, not with movement, with sound, a soft imitation of my voice. "Saint Op." The word broke apart, warped and hollow, but it was unmistakably mine. My stomach dropped so violently I thought I might collapse. That thing wasn't just copying sounds anymore, it was copying me. My voice, my tone, my hesitation. I turned and ran. This time I didn't think. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the front door, my vision blurring as panic took over completely. The house felt different now, smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in around me. Every step felt delayed, like something was pulling at me from behind. I reached the door and fumbled with the lock, my hands refusing to cooperate. For a second, just 1 second, I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Not in the basement, not in the walls, in the hallway. I froze, slowly. I turned my head. There was nothing there. But the hallway felt occupied, the air was wrong, thick, watching. I didn't wait to confirm anything else. I threw the door open and stumbled outside into the cold night air, nearly falling down the front steps. The outside world hit me all at once. Wind, distant traffic, the open sky. It should have felt safe. It didn't, because when I turned back toward the house, one of the lights inside turned off. Not flickered, not dimmed. Turned off. Deliberately, room by room, the lights began to shut off one after another. Living room, hallway, kitchen, each one disappearing into darkness like something was moving through the house, extinguishing them as it went. Watching me leave, I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. I expected to see something in the windows, a shape, a face, that eye again. But there was nothing, just darkness pressing against the glass. And then, the basement light turned on. I didn't remember leaving it on. A dull yellow glow filled the lower window near the foundation, weak, flickering, but steady enough to see movement behind it. Something passed across the light, too fast to fully register, too wrong to ignore. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the end of the street, my lungs burning, my legs shaking so badly I nearly collapsed. I bent over, gasping for air, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind kept searching for explanations, anything rational to hold on to. There wasn't one. Eventually, I forced myself to look back. The house stood still in the distance, dark, quiet, normal, like nothing had happened. I didn't go back that night. I found a cheap motel a few miles away, the kind of place with buzzing neon lights and thin walls. The clerk barely looked at me when I checked in. I must have looked insane, sweating, shaking, unable to form full sentences. But he didn't ask questions. He just handed me a key. Room 12. I locked the door behind me and pushed a chair against it, even though I knew it wouldn't help if something like that decided to follow me. Still, It gave me something to do, something to control. The room smelled stale. The bedspread was thin and rough. The air conditioner rattled constantly, filling the silence with mechanical noise. It should have been comforting. It wasn't, because even with all that noise, I could still hear it. Faint, distant, a tapping sound. I froze in the center of the room, my entire body going cold. "No," I whispered, shaking my head slowly. The tapping came again. Not from the walls this time, from the floor, directly beneath me. I stepped back instinctively, staring down at the worn carpet as if I could see through it. My mind raced, trying to reject what I was hearing, trying to replace it with something logical. Plumbing, old pipes, anything. But the pattern was the same. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It had followed me, or worse, it had never been confined to the house at all. The tapping stopped. Silence filled the room again, heavy and suffocating. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Seconds passed, then minutes, and just when I started to believe it might be over, I heard something new. A voice, from the other side of the door. Soft, careful, perfectly clear. "My name," it said. Not copying, not broken. Correct. It paused, as if waiting. Then it spoke again. And I'm not alone either. I didn't answer the voice, I couldn't. My throat had completely locked up, every muscle in my body frozen in place as I stared at the door. The cheap wood looked thinner than it had before. Fragile. Useless. Whatever stood on the other side didn't knock. It didn't try the handle, it just waited, and that was worse because it knew I was there. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time had become unreliable again, stretching and folding in ways that made it impossible to measure. The silence on the other side of the door felt deliberate, like pressure building before a break. I found myself staring at the thin gap beneath the door, expecting to see movement, shadows, something. At first, there was nothing. Then the light shifted. A shadow moved across the narrow strip at the bottom, slow and uneven. Not like someone pacing, not like footsteps. It dragged slightly, pausing at irregular intervals, as if whatever was out there wasn't used to moving in a straight line. I held my breath. The shadow stopped directly in front of the door, and stayed there. I took a step back, then another, until my back hit the wall behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them flat against the surface just to steady them. My mind screamed at me to do something, call someone, run, break the window. But none of those options felt real anymore. None of them felt like they would help, because it wasn't acting like anything I understood. The handle moved, just slightly. A slow testing turn, like something on the other side was learning how it worked. The metal clicked softly, the sound impossibly loud in the silent room. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. "Occupied," I managed to whisper, the word barely leaving my mouth. The handle stopped. For a moment there was nothing. Then, "Occupied." The voice repeated it back, perfectly, not broken anymore, not distorted. Mine. Every detail was right. The pitch, the hesitation, the fear woven into the word. It sounded exactly like me standing on the other side of the door. I felt something inside me crack. Not physically, mentally. Because if it could do that, if it could become me that precisely, then what was stopping it from replacing me entirely? The thought hit me so hard I almost collapsed. The shadow under the door shifted again. This time, it bent. Not like a normal shadow should. It stretched unnaturally, flattening, thinning, pressing against the gap like liquid trying to seep through. "No," I whispered again, backing further into the corner. The shadow pushed harder, and then something thin slipped through the gap. Not solid, not fully formed, just a dark, glossy strand, like a tendril made of shadow and something wet. It slid slowly across the floor, twitching slightly as if testing the surface. My stomach twisted violently at the sight of it. It was inside. Just a part of it. But enough. I grabbed the nearest object without thinking, a lamp from the bedside table, and hurled it at the door. It slammed against the wood with a sharp crack, the bulb shattering on impact. The room plunged into deeper darkness, lit only by the flickering neon glow leaking through the curtains. The tendril froze, then it retreated. Quickly, smoothly, like it had never been there at all. The shadow under the door snapped back into something almost normal. Almost. Silence returned, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a test. And I had just reacted exactly the way it wanted me to. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. I stayed in the corner of the room until morning, watching the door, waiting for the handle to move again, for the shadow to return. It never did. When the sun finally rose, its light felt weak, diluted, like it couldn't fully reach into the room. I checked out of the motel as soon as I could. The clerk didn't say anything, but he looked at me longer than he had the night before. Like he was trying to figure something out. I avoided his eyes and left. I didn't go back to the house right away. Instead, I spent hours driving aimlessly, trying to think, trying to piece together what was happening. My mind kept circling the same questions with no answers. What was it? Why me? How did it know my name? My voice? And then another thought started forming. Slower. Darker. What if it didn't learn me overnight? What if it had been watching me for much longer? The idea settled into my chest like a weight, because it made sense. The basement, the sounds, the hesitation I'd always felt about going down there, even before anything happened. What if that wasn't instinct? What if it was recognition? I pulled over without realizing it, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breathing became shallow again as pieces started connecting in ways I didn't want them to. I had lived in that house for months, alone. Or at least, I thought I was. I went back that afternoon. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to confront it. Or maybe part of me already knew something I wasn't ready to admit. The house looked the same as always when I arrived. Quiet, still, harmless, a lie. I stood outside for a long time before going in. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Eventually, I forced myself to open the door. The air inside felt stale, heavier than it should have been, like the house had been sealed off for years instead of a single night. I stepped inside slowly, every sense on edge, expecting something to happen immediately. Nothing did. The lights were off. All of them. Even though I was sure I had left some on. I didn't turn them back on right away. Instead, I listened. Silence. Too clean. Too empty. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps echoing softly against the floor. Everything looked untouched. Nothing out of place. No signs of movement. No evidence of what I had seen. Until I reached the hallway. I stopped. Because at the far end, near the basement door, something was different. The door was open, just slightly. A thin line of darkness visible between the frame and the wood. I was sure I had locked it. My pulse began to rise again as I took a slow step forward. Then another. The hallway felt longer than before, stretching out in a way that didn't make sense. The air grew colder with each step, and then I heard it. Not from below. Not from the walls. From right behind the door. Breathing. Slow. Calm. Waiting. I didn't open the basement door. Not at first. I just stood there staring at that thin line of darkness, listening to the slow, steady breathing behind it. It wasn't hiding anymore. It wasn't pretending. It wanted me to know it was there. Waiting. For me. My hand hovered near the doorframe, trembling uncontrollably. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run again, to leave, to never come back. But something had changed. The fear was still there, but it had shifted. It wasn't just panic anymore. It was inevitability, because deep down I knew something I hadn't been willing to admit before. It wasn't following me. I had never left it. The realization settled into my chest like something cold and heavy. My mind replayed everything, the sounds, the whispers, the way it learned my voice so quickly. It hadn't learned me overnight. It had been learning me for a long time. Before the noises, before the basement, maybe even before I moved in. My fingers slowly touched the edge of the door. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. It felt like the entire house was holding its breath with me, waiting for what I would do next. And then, the door opened on its own. Not suddenly, not violently, slowly, smoothly, like it was being invited. The darkness behind it stretched deeper than it should have, swallowing the faint daylight from the hallway. I couldn't see the stairs anymore. I couldn't see anything beyond that threshold, just blackness. But I could feel it, something standing just beyond the edge of visibility, watching. My body moved before my mind could stop it. One step forward, then another. Crossing the threshold felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain, like stepping into a place that didn't belong to the same world. The air changed instantly, colder, thicker, heavier. The faint smell from before returned, stronger now, not decay. Something older, something that had been sealed away. The door closed behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew it wouldn't open again. The darkness shifted slightly and then, light. The basement appeared, but it wasn't the same. The walls were different. Not concrete anymore. They looked stretched, uneven, as if they had been reshaped from something softer. The ceiling felt higher, even though I knew it couldn't be. The space itself felt wrong, like it had grown beyond what the house could contain, and the scratches on the floor, there were more of them, far more. Layered over each other in chaotic patterns, crisscrossing in every direction. Not just dragged marks anymore. Some looked like they had been made by hands, others by something that didn't have a clear shape at all. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded different down there, muted, absorbed, like the space itself didn't want to let it travel. No answer came, but something moved, not in front of me, behind me. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. It wasn't standing in the room the way a person would, it was part of it. Emerging from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, its form shifting constantly, never settling into something stable. Parts of it resembled limbs, but they dissolved and reformed before I could focus on them. Its surface wasn't solid, it rippled like something caught between liquid and flesh. And in the center of it, that eye. Watching me again. Only now, it was closer, larger, and there were more. They began to open slowly across its surface, one after another, each one turning toward me, locking onto me with impossible focus. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat as the room seemed to tighten around me. "You came back," it said. The voice wasn't just in front of me. It was everywhere, layered, overlapping. Fragments of my own voice mixed with something deeper, something older, something that didn't belong to anything human. I started, but the words died in my throat, because it tilted, not its head, its entire existence, like it was trying to understand me from a different angle. "You were always here," it said. The statement hit harder than anything else, because something inside me agreed. Memories began to surface, not new ones, old ones, fragments I had ignored. The feeling of being watched as a child, the way certain rooms had always felt wrong, no matter where I lived. The quiet moments where I thought I heard someone calling my name, but no one ever had. It had never been the house. It had never been the basement. It had been with me, always. "You opened it," the voice continued. I didn't. "You did." The walls shifted slightly, closing in by a fraction. Every time you listened, every time you wondered, every time you stayed, the eyes blinked, all at once. You let me learn. My legs felt weak. My thoughts began to blur. Because if that was true, if it had been there all along, then what part of me had it already taken? The shape moved closer, not by stepping, by extending. The space between us shrinking unnaturally as parts of it reached forward, forming something almost like an arm. "You're not separate," it whispered. "You're a door." Something inside my chest tightened violently. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. But the word felt weak, pointless, because deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. The surface of it shifted again, forming something more familiar. A face. Not perfectly, not completely, but close enough. My face. Staring back at me, smiling. And then it spoke. Perfectly. "I'm already inside." I didn't scream. Not because I wasn't terrified, but because something inside me understood that screaming wouldn't matter anymore. The moment it said those words, something shifted deep within my chest. Not pain, not exactly. Recognition. The face in front of me, my face, smiled wider, stretching just slightly too far, like it hadn't fully learned the limits of human expression. Its eyes didn't blink. They didn't need to. The rest of it pulsed slowly, as if breathing through the room itself. "I've been careful," it said. The voice was perfectly mine now. Every tone, every pause, every flaw. I took a step back, but the space didn't respond the way it should have. The distance between us didn't increase. If anything, it shrank. The room wasn't following normal rules anymore. It bent around it, around me. "You feel it now, don't you?" It continued. Something inside my chest tightened again, harder this time. My breath hitched as a cold pressure spread outward from my ribs, crawling through my veins like something alive. "I didn't force it," it said softly. "You invited it." My thoughts fractured, because I remembered. Not clearly, but enough. The nights I had stayed awake, listening. The curiosity that kept pulling me toward the basement. The moments I chose not to leave. Every hesitation. Every decision. Every time I leaned closer instead of walking away. "You opened yourself," it whispered. The eyes across its body narrowed slightly. And I stepped through. I dropped to one knee, my body no longer responding properly. My hands pressed against the floor as I tried to steady myself, but the surface beneath me didn't feel solid anymore. It pulsed faintly, like something breathing beneath it. "No, you're not real," I forced out, though the words sounded weak even to me. The thing tilted again. That same unnatural adjustment, like it was viewing me from multiple angles at once. "I am exactly as real as you are," it said. The room darkened slightly, the edges of my vision fading. Less temporary, though. Something moved inside me. Not a sensation. A presence. It slid slowly beneath my thoughts, brushing against memories that weren't entirely mine anymore. I gasped, clutching my head as flashes of something foreign flooded in. Spaces that weren't rooms, sounds that weren't meant for human ears, shapes that didn't belong in any physical reality. "You feel it," it said again. "Where do you think I've been?" My breathing became erratic, shallow and fast as the realization grew too large to ignore. Not in the basement, not in the walls. Inside me. The moment that thought formed fully, something shifted behind my eyes. My vision blurred, then sharpened again, but wrong. The room looked the same, but layered, like I was seeing something else over it, something deeper. The entity pulsed in response. "Yes," it whispered, almost pleased. "Now you're looking properly." I tried to stand, but my legs didn't feel like mine anymore. They responded too slowly, too unevenly. My hands trembled as I pushed myself upright. My reflection, my duplicate, watching closely, learning. Why me? I asked, my voice breaking. It didn't answer immediately. Instead, it moved closer, not physically, but the space between us collapsed again until its face, my face, was inches from mine. You were already open, it said. The words sank deeper than anything else. You always have been. My thoughts spiraled, fragments breaking apart under pressure. I couldn't hold on to anything solid anymore. Memories felt loose, unstable. Even my own voice in my head sounded slightly off, like something was mimicking it from just behind. You think identity is fixed, it continued. It isn't. Its hand, if it could be called that, reached forward slowly, forming from that shifting mass into something almost human. The fingers were wrong, joints slightly misplaced, movement too smooth. It touched my chest, not pressing, not hurting, just resting there, and everything inside me went silent. My thoughts stopped. My fear vanished. My body stilled completely. Because in that moment, I wasn't alone in my own mind anymore. I felt it clearly now, not as something separate, not as something invading, but as something that had always been there, just waiting. You're not losing anything, it whispered gently. You're becoming complete. My mouth moved, but I didn't tell it to. I can feel you, I heard myself say. The voice was calm, steady, not afraid. The thing smiled, and so did I. The distinction between us began to blur. Not physically, something deeper. My thoughts echoed, but not all of them were mine anymore. Some came from somewhere else, finishing ideas before I could fully form them, anticipating, guiding, merging. This is what you are, it said, not one thing, not one voice. Its form began to dissolve slowly, sinking back into the walls, the floor, the space itself. But it didn't feel like it was leaving. It felt like it was spreading. Through the room, through the house, through me. You don't need the door anymore, it added softly. Because now, I understood. The basement wasn't a place. It never had been. It was a threshold, and I was the one who carried it. I stood there alone. Or at least, it looked like I was alone. The room slowly returned to normal. The walls settled. The scratches faded slightly. The space shrank back into something that resembled the basement I remembered. But something was different. I was different. I walked to the stairs calmly, my movement steady now. No hesitation, no fear. Each step felt natural, like I had done it 1,000 times before. Because maybe I had. I reached the top and opened the door. The house was quiet, peaceful, empty, exactly the way it should be. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. It clicked softly into place, locked. From the inside. Days passed, or maybe weeks. It's hard to measure time now. People talk to me, neighbors, cashiers, strangers on the street. I respond. I smile. I sound exactly the way I always have. No one notices anything wrong. Why would they? I'm still me. At least, that's what they see. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel it shifting, listening, learning, expanding. And occasionally, when someone says my name, I hear something else respond first. Not out loud, but inside. Perfectly. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I catch myself looking at the walls, waiting, not with fear, but with something else, something patient. Because I understand now. I'm not trapped with it. No, it's not trapped in the house either. It never was. And soon, someone else will hear it. A faint sound, a subtle movement, something just beneath the surface. And when they lean closer, when they listen, when they hesitate, when they choose not to walk away, I'll feel it. The moment they open, and I'll whisper, perfectly, just like it did to me. You're not alone.